Alright, so UFC 247 went down on the 8th of February, and this video is mainly going to be about me sharing my thoughts on the main event, which was John Jones versus Dominic Reyes for the light heavyweight championship. Yeah, I'm just gonna get straight into the fight and my thoughts about it. There's been a lot of talk in the MMA community on who should have actually won the bout because it was actually a decision at the end. There was no knockout or any submission. Yeah, I'm just gonna dive right into it. For those of you who are not too familiar with what went down in UFC, I'm just going to give a very quick background. So, of course, UFC stands for Ultimate Fighting Championship. It's a mixed martial arts organization, and it's the biggest organization in the sport in the world currently, in which practically the best fighters in the world compete against each other. And the whole idea of the UFC or mixed martial arts was really to find out which martial art is ultimately the best, because previously we've had historically we've had different martial arts coming up from different areas, from different countries in the world. For example, Brazil has Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In Asia, there's Muay Thai, there's karate, there's a whole bunch of of course, aspects in martial arts. So the whole point was just to figure out, would a Taekwondo fighter ever be able to defeat a karate world champion? And eventually, what we've seen since the inception of the sport in 1993 is that the ultimate fighter will always need to have a mixture of all. He needs to be an excellent striker, an excellent wrestler, and who has a good ground defense, who can use jiu-jitsu to get out of a bad situation on the floor. So, that being said, the reason I talk about the history of the UFC a little bit and of MMA is because that's going to play into my thinking of the result of the fight. So, just a background on the fighters themselves. John Jones is arguably the greatest MMA fighter of all time, and definitely the greatest light heavyweight fighter of all time. He's 26-1. That's his record. So that means he's won 26 bouts and he's lost one bout. But even that is most likely going to be it's going to be re-engaged. The decision is going to be turned because he basically got disqualified for a really stupid reason, a stupid rule that the UFC is trying to overturn as of now. So practically John Jones is 26-0. He's unbeaten. And Dominic Reyes is a new upcoming challenger. He was 11-0 before he was 12-0 before his fight against John, and of course his record currently is 12-1 because he lost the fight on the 8th of February. So to get into the fight, basically what went down is these are championship fights. So in MMA, in championship fights, we have 5 rounds. Each round being of 5 minutes, and Dominic Reyes actually won the first 3 rounds against John Jones, who, like I said, it was a clear favorite because he's practically never lost against anybody. And even though Dominic won the first 3 rounds out of a total of 5, since John won the last 2, he was given the decision over Dominic, and he retained his title. So currently in the MMA community, there's obviously a lot of arguments, a lot of I wouldn't say controversy, but there's definitely a lot of talk on who should have actually been the winner. So most people feel, at least by what I've seen online, but then people talk a lot of shit online, but a lot of people think that Dominic should have been given the decision since he so clearly won the first 3 rounds. And of course, there's the other faction who believe that the 4th and the 5th rounds, or rather, the later rounds in the fight count for more. So I'm just going to share my thoughts on this. So I personally belong to the second faction, who believe that championship rounds, which are the 4th and 5th rounds, should count more in a fight. And the reason for that is that we'll have to take a step back and really think of what combat sports really is. So we can't really compare it with mainstream sports. We can't compare it with outfield sports or on-court sports such as tennis. You can compare a tennis to a badminton. You can compare a football to rugby, but you can't compare fighting to any of them, because fighting in its essence is very different from every other sport, because it's not about who lands more on the other. It's not really about who touches the other person more. It's really about who beats whose ass. And at the end of the day, if there's a fighter, who's absolutely beaten the fuck out of someone else in the last round, that guy or girl is the winner of that fight, because the origin of combat sports is ancient. I mean, it's in people's DNA to resort to violence and aggression to kind of to resolve a problem. And the essence of mixed martial arts was, to really find out which guy overall is better than someone else. And the reason why we have rounds in boxing or in Muay Thai or in Taekwondo or currently in MMA is just to make it a little more tactical and to just take it away from the dark ages where we're just gonna put two people in a cage and let them fight to the death. That was removed because that's ghastly. People don't want to see that anymore. We're more civilized. However, the whole point of fighting is still to determine the victor at the end of the day. We don't want to see someone kill the other person, but we still want to keep the essence of fighting the same. So the whole the concept of rounds was just to allow the fighters to kind of regain energy at the end of each round, to allow the fight to go on for longer and to not make the fight as gruesome as it would have gotten if we didn't keep any time limit. However, that doesn't change the fact that at the end what we want to see is who beats whom. We don't want to see round wise who beats who, if that makes any sense. A very good example is Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, which was one of the greatest boxing fights of all time. It took place on the 1st of December in 2018, and these two are currently the biggest heavyweight boxing stars in the world. And the way that fight went down is that Tyson Fury, boxing has 12 rounds, Tyson Fury easily won maybe 9 out of those 12 rounds against Deontay Wilder, because he kept jabbing him, he kept punching him, kept moving around, kept touching him, but never really hurt Wilder. But however, Wilder, I think around the 8th or 9th round, knocked Tyson Fury down once, and then in the 12th round, he smashed him in his face, and Tyson Fury literally got up on the 10th second and then continued and finished the fight. Now, in a situation like that, ideally you would say, or we would all say that Tyson Fury should be winning the fight overall because he won maybe 8 or 9 rounds out of 12. However, the fight was declared a draw, a tie between both of them, because knocking someone down counts way more, because it's actual damage that you're causing to someone else. So in a scenario where you're just trying to declare who is the stronger person, just taking a step back from the sport side of it, Deontay Wilder in many people's eyes was the stronger person, because he knocked Fury down and Fury took a full 10 seconds to get back up. So now, of course, we need to treat it like a sport, because that's how we're terming combat as of now, right? We're calling it combat sports. But it's important to still understand that we still need to find out who really dominated the other person, who really imposed their will on the other person. And it doesn't matter if you can really, keep on someone else for the first 3 rounds or out of a 5-round fight, if you can't see it through. And that's what Jones-Reyes couldn't do. He couldn't see it through. It's very easy to exhaust yourself in the first 3 rounds. The only reason I believe he could even do that is because John was pacing himself. John Jones has had the majority of his career in defending his title. So he has significantly more experience than Jones-Reyes in 5-round fights. So the whole idea was for John, and this is just my personal take on the fight, was that he was pacing himself because he knew that Dominic is going to run out of gas in the 4th and 5th rounds, and that did happen. I mean, it was very evident. Dominic stopped in many ways stopped pushing. He stopped fighting. He was only defending himself in the fourth and fifth rounds, and not only that, John also got 2 takedowns, or at least 3 if I'm not mistaken. And it was a very clear domination by John towards the end of the fight. And at the end of the fight, I mean, if you were to just pick, if you just came and watched, took a look at both of them right at the end of the fight without having seen anything else, and if you had to pick a winner by just visually looking at both the individuals, it was John, because he was ultimately the stronger man in that night. If it was a 3-round fight, completely different scenario, I'm sure. But we can't even say that in a 3-round fight Dominic would have beaten John, because John wouldn't have paced himself as much. He would have also exhausted himself in the first 3 rounds, and in that case we don't even know what would have happened. I'm not saying Dominic Reyes can't beat him. I'm just saying we don't know whether he could have beaten him in a 3-round fight either. So, there are other people who obviously share, people in the community globally who have a much bigger presence than me, of course. For example, Conor McGregor's coach, I'm forgetting his name. I'm sorry. So Conor McGregor's coach, basically, he tweeted right after the fight that, I know there's a lot of there's a lot of banter, there's a lot of controversy around the decision. However, I think Jon Jones wins the fight and he says that in a scenario where the two are fighting to the death, Jon wins that fight, right? So at the end of the day, who's really the victor? Because in fighting, we look for the victor. We don't just look for the winner of that contest. In football, the goal is to score goals. It's not to dominate the other team. I mean, you can dominate the other team, but it doesn't matter unless you score goals. In fighting, it doesn't matter if you're just touching someone else. It doesn't matter if I'm constantly jabbing you in your nose. But if you beat the fuck out of me for a minute by just literally taking me down and staying on top of me, punching me in the face with your elbows and your hands, then it doesn't really matter if I kept jabbing you throughout 5 or 6 rounds. It really doesn't, because at the end of the day, you're stronger than me, and that's what happened in Jon Jones and Dominic Reyes. Excuse me. So and the same goes with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan says the same thing. Of course, we can't treat it like an animalistic fight between 2 individuals, but the essence of fighting is still that. It's still to figure out who can really dominate someone else. And if that fight was to go on indefinitely, Jon Jones would have been the victor very clearly, because Dominic Reyes just he was excellent in the first 3 rounds. However, he didn't get a knockdown on Jones. He didn't really flatten him out at any point of the time. He didn't even get a takedown. So it's difficult to really convince the judges of having beaten the champion unless you've really beaten the champion. That's just how the sport works. If you want to win the belt, you really got to beat the champion. There shouldn't be, I mean, if there is if there's kind of talk about it, and if it's an arguable decision, then usually it goes for the champion, because to have the belt, you got to beat the champ. And Reyes didn't do that on that night. However, he did prove to us that he can hang with John. I mean, he clearly could. No one else, I can't recall anyone else who won the first 3 rounds straight against Jon Jones over the last, I don't know, I can't think of any fight. So it was interesting, and I'm glad. Again, this is just my take on this whole situation. I'm not a mixed martial arts expert myself. I've just been following the sport for the last 4.5 years, and I'm a very avid fan. And I'm glad that there's talk taking place on this. I'm glad that people are talking more about the sport, and because we need better judging, we need better decision making. And I think this is overall the fight has been a positive step overall for the sport. Having said that, if for those of you who haven't watched UFC or who haven't specifically watched Jon Jones fight, definitely do. I would recommend watch Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson won because they fought twice. So John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson won, was a great fight. To give you some more background, John Jones was also the youngest UFC champion ever at the age of 23. So there are a lot of title fights of his to watch. He's one of the prime athletes of our time currently. So and then if you watch Dominic Reyes versus John Jones, you'll also appreciate how much Reyes actually put in to give Jones such a tough time in the fight. And yeah, I hope this video gets a few more people interested in the sport that I love so much. Cheers.